Welcome to Crime Most French, a weekly podcast taking you through intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the True Crime Podcast on the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence.
The episode this week takes us to Paris in the early 20th century. It is the story of another gang that was terrorizing the streets of Paris for a few years. There's been a number of those. We'll probably cover more of them. For example, the Apaches in the future.
Which arrondissement was that?
They were covering Paris and the region, really.
So just all over Paris?
Yeah, they weren't specific to an area or a street.
Okay.
The gang name was La Bande Bonnot, which is Bonnot's gang.
Okay.
Bonnot being the leader of the gang.
Mm-hmm.
It's another of those gangs that made it to the public unconscious. Everybody has heard of the Bande Bonnot in French. If you ask anybody, they wouldn't tell you, oh yeah, that was a gang in early 20th century, but that's pretty much all they know. And this is just a name. So I was interested in looking at what exactly they did and who they were.
Okay, so maybe the equivalent of, say, the Hole in the Wall gang from the US during the Wild West, and maybe the Great Train Robbers in the UK.
Yeah, something like that everybody knows, but not the details.
Mm-hmm.
So the leader, Jules Bonnot, he gave his name to the gang. He was born on the 14th of October 1876 in Pont-Droit, dans le Doubs. So Doubs is east, southeast, east, somewhere there.
Okay.
His mum died on the 23rd of January 1887.
Oh, so he would have been reasonably young then?
Yes, she died in Besançon when he was 10.
Okay.
His dad was a smoldering plant worker, and he had to take on his education because he was then an only dad.
Yeah.
Bruno wasn't good at school, so he leaves at 14, which was the minimum age you could leave.
Yeah.
His teachers said of him that he was lazy, he wasn't disciplined, and he was also insolent. He was talking back to them. That impudence will stay with him his whole life. It will come back later in life.
So generally, he probably would have been called cocky, if using a modern parlance.
Yes, but at the time, we have to remember it's the early 20th century, so it's not something we're supposed to do when you were a kid. We're supposed to say yes to your parents and your teachers, and that was it, and that's not what he was doing.
Yeah, be seen and not heard.
Yeah. At 14, he starts an apprenticeship, but is not very motivated, and he doesn't really like the hard work, so he often rebels against his employers. At 15, he's sentenced for the first time because he was fishing with illegal tools. Is what I have no idea what it is.
That is weird.
I'm thinking dynamite, but probably not. He's sentenced again in 1895 after a bar brawl.
Okay.
He hates his brothers and his sister because they come from a second marriage. So after his mum died, his dad remarried and had kids.
He sounds like he has a massive chip on his shoulder already.
Yes. And after he hit his dad, he's kicked out of the house.
Wow. Yeah, no wonder.
He ends up in Nancy, where he's spotted by the police because he was spending a lot of time with prostitutes, so he was suspecting of ping.
Oh, okay.
I haven't found any
Evidence.
sentence or anything of that, but that's what the police was expecting.
So there's no photos of him with a big, huge, wide brim hat and a massive feather coming out of it or anything. That would have been the clincher to find out if he was.
Yeah, no, that isn't one of those photos. In 1897, he's sentenced again for 3 months in prison for rebellion and GBH.
Wow, rebelling.
Yeah, that was a thing at the time. Then he starts his military service, 15th of November 1897, and that lasted 3 years at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So he's in an infantry regiment. He finishes, strangely, his service with a good behavior certificate. I don't know how that happened.
So perhaps he just needed heavy-handed discipline rather than...
Maybe, but at the same time, the soldiers were not they were quite hard, so maybe he tried and they kind of made sure.
Exactly, squashed it down quickly.
Possibly. I have no information about that, but I'm really surprised when I saw that had a good behavior certificate.
Perhaps he just needed structure.
Maybe.
I mean, being in the army, I mean, it's so you don't get a minute to yourself. Everything is timed out perfectly. Maybe that's what he needed.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
Maybe. He also has a sniper diploma.
Wow.
After the army, he becomes a mechanic. He gets married on the 14th of August, 1901,
Okay.
in Vouvray. I didn't look up where it was. With a woman called Sophie Burdet, and she was a seamstress.
Okay.
His eldest brother, called Justin Louis, commits suicide by hanging in 1903
Ooh.
after a love affair gone wrong.
Oh. Sad.
He then starts working for a train company, the Bellegarde company. He is, though, fired because of his union and anarchist activities.
Oh, he was a die-hard red, was he?
It wasn't really red because anarchists are not communists.
No, that is very
and they don't
true.
get along very well.
Yeah, that is true.
Remember in the previous episode, the second episode, we talked a little bit about the terrorist activities of anarchists in Paris in the 30s or 20s. But it started before that, and he was part of all that. So the problem is, after he's fired for anarchism and unionism, he's not employable anymore because nobody wants to hire him.
Nobody will touch him with a barge pole.
Exactly. So he moves to Switzerland,
Okay.
where he finds work as a mechanic in Geneva, and that is the time his wife becomes pregnant.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the baby, a girl called Emily, dies after a few days.
Oh, sad.
So Bonnot continues his anarchist activities, and then he's kicked out of Switzerland.
Wow. You know you're bad when you get kicked out of a whole country.
Yes. Yeah, he's banned from Switzerland. He's not allowed to go back in. But he has a gift for machinery and mechanic.
Okay.
And people who make him work recognize it, so he gets hired again.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes a mechanic for a car manufacturer called Berlier in Lyon. When I was a kid, there was a lot still of Berlier lorries on the roads. They were quite old. They were probably from the 60s and 70s, but there were still quite a lot. There's none now. So they must have been bought and all disappeared. I don't know.
France still has a very strong car manufacturing base, but it's a lot like the UK was. There seems to have been lots of brands that have just completely died away.
Yeah, well, a lot of them were bought because in France, for example, you really have two car manufacturers. You have Renault, which co-owns Nissan, and you have Peugeot. That owns everything else.
Yeah.
So they own Citroën DS. They own old brands like Simca, Talbot, Panhard. Panhard was bought by Citroën in the 40s, I think, but then Citroën was bought by Peugeot. Yes. Peugeot owns everything, and now that it's merging with Fiat, they are trying to become the second Volkswagen of Europe.
I see.
Really, so it's good. They own 17 brands, I think.
Okay.
17 existing brands, not old brands.
But slight digression.
Yes, including Dodge. He's still very active union-wise and denounces what he considers injustice, and he's also involved in starting strikes.
Okay.
So it doesn't go down well with his employers, you can imagine. So he decides to leave Lyon and goes to Saint-Étienne, which is just west of Lyon. It's not very far up the mountains. And that's the time when he's monitored by the police because they've described him as violent and nasty.
Wow.
So now they keep an eye on him. In Saint-Étienne, he's a mechanic again. He lives with his wife in the house of the union secretary at the time called Benoit Antoine Besson. Benoit Besson becomes his wife's lover.
Oh, of course.
Besson leaves for Switzerland with Bonnot's wife and his son.
God.
And of course, Bonnot can't follow because he's not allowed in Switzerland.
No, God. That's another chip to add to the shoulder.
Yeah, and he will never see his son again.
Oh, no.
Or his wife.
Yeah.
His son is even compelled by a tribunal on the 31st of March 1926 to change his surname from Bonnot to Besson. So the tribunal decided you can't have your dad's name, you have to have your adoptive dad's name.
Wow, your dad's such a scumbag.
Yeah.
You can't keep his name. That's a bad hombre, as they say in bad westerns.
So Bonnot, true to himself, continues his anarchist and union activities. He gets fired again. Then he lives, like many at the time, as unemployed and poor. So he lives on the street at that point.
Okay.
Because really, he's exhausted all his possibilities of employment. In 1906, 1907 is when he starts his criminal activities, proper criminal activities. So he's involved in several burglaries, for example, with weapons.
So he's now crossed a line from being from an ideology criminal into financial.
Yeah, it's more practical now.
Yeah.
So he does that with a guy called Joseph Platano, who's an Italian baker.
Mm-hmm.
That's when he learns safe cracking, and that allows him to open 2 mechanic shops in Lyon. He fixes cars and motorbikes during the day,
Yeah.
and that gives him time at night to commit burglaries.
You can kind of see why a mechanic would be good at safe cracking.
Yeah. Also, the burglaries give him money to run his business,
Of course.
to establish businesses. So.
Yeah.
And in 1910, he goes to London to meet other anarchists. Apparently, there was a big convention in London in 1910.
How on earth can you actually arrange a bunch of anarchists to have a big convention? That sounds like an oxymoron. Anarchists being organised enough to have a convention.
Yes. And according to the legend, that's when he becomes Arthur Conan Doyle's driver.
Really?
Yep. He also probably becomes a close acquaintance of Ashton Wolfe, or Wolfie, I don't know how you pronounce it, as Arthur Conan Doyle's best friend.
Okay.
That is because he has a gift for driving as well. So he's a good mechanic and he's a good driver.
Okay. And a good safe cracker.
And a good safe cracker, so you can see where that's going.
Yeah.
It's kind of controversial though, because most in fact, Bonnot's biographies mention that he was Conan Doyle's driver, but none of Conan Doyle's biographies mention that Bonnot was his driver. However, Edmond Locard, I don't know if he's English or French, he's the father of scientific police. He recounted a story once, Arthur Conan Doyle wanting to know how police works, especially scientific police, because that worked for him.
Yes.
Was background
information
research.
for Holmes, yeah.
Yeah. He visited the police lab in Lyon, which was the first scientific police lab in the world.
Okay.
And he stopped in front of a photo on the wall and he said, "Oh, that's Jules, that's my old driver."
Oh, okay. So that seems to...
So
It's it's very strange given that Conan Doyle has some crazy, wacky nonsense in his life that he would be kind of like ashamed of having a slightly sketchy chauffeur for a short period of time.
we don't know if he was ashamed of it. It's just not recounted in his biographies. He didn't write those, so we don't know. That story was told by the guy who established the scientific police in Lyon in France.
So, I mean, we're talking credible source and it's come straight from the horse's mouth. So
It comes from a fairly credible source, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but there's no proof of it.
No.
But that could be what he started doing in London for a while.
Okay.
But at the end of 1910, he's back in Lyon again.
Mm-hmm.
That's when he starts using all his skills together and he starts using cars for criminal activity.
Getaway drivers.
That is, at the time, an innovation. Nobody was using cars for crime at the time because, of course, 1910 cars were like 15 years or not much more than that. Commercial cars, anyway.
You'd actually probably be quicker to run away on foot or use a horse rather than using a car.
Cars gave him a massive advantage because at the time the police was either on foot, on horse, or on bicycle.
Yeah.
So they just couldn't catch him when he was in the car.
Yeah.
Same as in the 60s when criminals were using the Mark II.
Yes.
The police
Yeah,
had
of
trouble
course,
keeping
yes.
up until they got Mark IIs as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So same thing here, but 50 years or 60 years earlier, he had the same idea and it gave him a massive advantage.
Presumably the vehicles then weren't kind of like charabangs. You started and cranked at the beginning. Presumably they were slightly more...
Probably barely more than that, but he knew how to run them, he knew how to fix them, he knew how to drive them.
Yeah, that's true.
So really he was the right person.
Yeah, good advantage.
Yeah.
Mm.
As the police looks for him, he leaves Lyon because it's getting a bit hot.
Yeah.
So he goes to Paris with Platano, his
baker.
good old friend. Yeah. On the way, he kills Platano.
Not so good friend.
Not so good friend. It's not clear how it happened. There's no real first-hand account of what happened. He tells the story later on to his accomplices to explain why Platano disappeared, but we only know that because they repeated it when they were arrested.
Okay.
So we don't have proof, we don't really know what happened. The story is Platano was important for him because he was his introduction to the anarchist groups.
Okay.
Because Platano was very involved in anarchist groups. But Platano had inherited money, so he wasn't poor.
Okay.
But he tended to travel with his money in his pocket. So he had inherited 27,000 francs.
Wow, that's a lot.
Which at the time would have been probably close to $1 million of to these euros.
Mm.
So allegedly, according to the story, Bonnot said Platano got wounded in a burglary,
Mm-hmm.
and he decided to kill him as a mercy killing because he was going to die.
If it was just dead weight at that point.
And also he said, "Oh, he's suffering, he's going to die. I'm going to kill him first."
Oh, how noble.
So that's the story he tells. But given that he pocketed the money,
That smells.
it kind of smells.
Yeah.
So it could be that he just wanted that money and did what he needed to do to get it.
Yeah, it smells, but not in a good way, like one of Panettone's baguettes. It smells rancid.
Yes. At the end of November 1911, Bonnot meets at the HQ of an anarchist newspaper several anarchists who will become his accomplices. So that's the beginning of the gang.
Okay.
That's all through anarchist groups. So he meets Octave Garnier, aka the Digger.
Octave. That's such an old man's name. That's old men in France. Their names are so amusing. Octave is definitely one of them.
My great-grandfather's brother was called Octave.
Yeah, your great-grandfather. Case in point.
Yes. He also meets Raymond Caillemot, aka Raymond the Science.
Oh, I see.
He also meets lesser characters for the story. He meets Etienne Monnier, aka Cimentov. It's just a nickname. At that point doesn't mean anything. Edouard Crouy, André Soudy, Eugène Dieudonné. Eugène Dieudonné is a special case in the story. It will come back at the end. He seemed to be involved, but not quite involved, so we don't really know what he's done, what he hasn't done.
Okay.
But we'll see what happens later. So they've all committed minor crimes already, but they're ready to move on to the big game. Bonnot's arrival acts as a trigger because he comes in with a set of skills that allows them to group together all their knowledge, all their skills, and become a very effective gang. So from November 1911 to May 1912, they make the newspapers a lot, mostly front page, because the newspapers are fascinated by the gang.
Okay.
And they're also very busy. To make it more interesting for the newspapers, they don't mind killing people. That also is when they start using cars for their crimes, because they use getaway cars.
Okay.
Bonnot is very often the getaway driver, so he doesn't really take part into the robberies, he just runs the car.
Mm-hmm. Well, you play to your strengths, don't you?
Yes. So the first notable attack that the gang committed was the robbery of the Société Générale, which is a bank in Paris, on the 21st of December 1911. On the 14th of December, Bonnot, Garnier and Caillemot steal a car that they're planning to use for another robbery. Because Bonnot knows cars, he picks a very good luxury car.
Okay.
It's a Delaunay Belleville, for those who know. It looks pretty much like a Ford T, but much bigger.
Okay.
So,
but it is the muscle car of the day, is it?
It is,
Okay.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So on the 21st of December at 9 a.m., Bonnot, Garnier and Caillemot, maybe a fourth man, we don't really know, turn up at the Société Générale.
Mm-hmm.
And they attack one of the money-delivering guys. I couldn't find out where the money came from, but I suspect some factory or something. So he was bringing the money to the bank.
Oh, this is like the Brinks.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the bricks at the time. So the guy was on his own with a bodyguard.
Okay.
They attack him in the street.
Mm-hmm.
Garnier fires twice at him. They severely wound him, and they steal his bag.
Wow.
Then Garnier jumps into the car. Bonnot, who's the getaway driver, starts going. He fires several times in the air to clear the street.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point, because it was happening in the street, they're starting to have a crowd looking at what was going on. Caillemot drops the money bag.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
He leans out to pick it up, and he sees somebody running towards him. We don't know who it was.
Okay.
Most likely it was the bodyguard. Fires at him, but misses.
Phew.
So, of course, all that makes it front page.
Oh, yes.
There's photos of the front pages on the website, on the episodes page.
So we're talking the first half of the century's version of Heat.
Yeah. Yes, it's exactly that. The fact that they use cars for their crimes makes it more appealing to people because it's all new. Most people don't have a car. A lot of people have barely seen one. And suddenly you have these gangsters who use getaway cars in their crimes.
But in a way, does that not make it even more... Yes, it makes it good for them to get away, but surely, A, there aren't that many cars going about, and B, does it not make them more noticeable?
It does make them noticeable, but because the police is on foot or on horse, it doesn't matter, really.
Yeah, I guess so.
So as long as they can get away and
ditch the car.
They do every time pretty much.
Yeah.
There's no problem.
No.
That's all they need.
Mm.
So they become known as the automobile gang
Okay.
for a while. And the car is the last member of the gang because there's always
Of
a car
course.
in what they do.
Of course.
So they abandon their car in Dieppe, that's in Normandy. So,
That's a long way.
but now it's about 2 hours drive. But at the time it would have been a lot more. Yeah. And then they come back to Paris. They're disappointed with the result of their first big game, big action. They only take 5,000 francs in money and some negotiable bonds as well.
Well, wow, the chauffeurs from the first episode would have been delighted with that haul.
That is true.
I guess the prices in Paris are always, you always need more money, don't you, if you live in a big city.
Yes. So Caraman goes to Belgium to negotiate the bonds and then comes back to Paris, but everybody's disappointed. The police discovers links between the gang and the anarchist circles.
Okay.
And that makes the story even bigger because now we're talking gangs, murderers, cars, and anarchists.
Okay, wow.
All in one big package.
That's quite literally an explosive combination.
Yeah. So the press loves them.
I guess anarchists are kind of like probably more readily linked in with crime rather than, say, the fictional surfers in Point Blank.
Yes. So the gang knows at that point that the police is after them. So they decide to seek refuge in a sympathetic anarchist called Victor Serge and his mistress. We know he disapproves of what they do, but by solidarity, because they're all anarchists, he decides to help them.
Yeah, heavy roll of eyes.
The police, who's investigated anarchist groups, we know, they turn up at his door, they search his house, and they arrest him.
Okay.
Allegedly because they found weapons in a package in the house. The press then presents Serge as the brain of the operation, without whom nothing would have been possible.
Okay, so completely getting it wrong.
We don't know yet,
Okay.
but that's how they present it.
Okay.
And then, of course, for everybody, the police and the press, it's just a matter of time before the rest of the gang is found because they've got the brain. In fact, the press coverage has the opposite effect of what the police was expecting because a lot of anarchists and anarchist groups start supporting and joining the gang.
Okay.
Because they go after someone they know is innocent, so they're going to help whoever the police is actually looking for. So they get, for example, René Vallée and André Soudy to join the gang. They're minor characters, but they're gang members. On the 31st of December 1911, in Gand, Bonnot, Garnier, Carouy try to steal a car, but they're surprised by the driver. But Garnier hits him on the head and then kills the security guard that was alerted by the noise and turned up.
Okay. Leave no witnesses.
Leave no witnesses, yep. On the 3rd of January, Carouy and an accomplice kill a rich man and his maid in Thiers. Nothing shows that the crime is related to the gang, really, because it's an attack in the street and they just kill them and rob them. But as far as the police is concerned, that's going to be another one of the gang's activities, and that will be used later.
Yeah, it's just a precursor for the main event.
But most likely it was entirely Carouy's doing. It wasn't to do with the gang. On the 27th of February 1912, Bonnot, Caraman, and Garnier steal another Delaunay Belleville. Okay. Same car, again. He likes that car. It's becoming the getaway car of choice now. Unfortunately, as they were driving dangerously, that's how the police described it in Paris.
Oh, they got pulled over.
No, they hit a bus.
Oh, wow.
And then they run away.
Oh, God.
So there's a cop called François Garnier, no relation, who was doing traffic at the time. He sees what happened and he tries to intervene, but he's shot 3 times. He's killed and leaves a wife and kid.
Oh, dear.
The next day, the gang tries to break into a notaire's safe, but again, they're surprised, so they leave empty-handed. They don't kill anyone at that point.
They really, really need to find out a really good lookout guy. Because they seem to intel. They seem to be getting surprised. Well, not just intel, but actually somebody with eyes that are just purely looking out for other activities that are going on at the same time as they're doing their shenanigans.
Yes. And they probably don't really choose their targets very well.
No.
They aim for where they know there's money, but they don't really look for whoever would be nearby, who...
They don't seem to do much logistical planning.
No. I think they're just thinking of a target and they're just going and not planning much because they know they can get away with the car. So really, they don't need planning. They just go in, take whatever they want, kill whoever's in their way, and then get away.
It's all heavily improvised.
Yeah. So in the meantime, Dieudonné is arrested. We talked about him earlier, some
Yep.
character.
Mm-hmm.
He denies any involvement with the gang, even though he admits knowing Bonnot and the others.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for him, the guy who they attacked in front of the bank in Paris
Yeah.
survived and says he recognizes
This is
him.
okay.
He also recognizes Garnier and Carouy on photos. It's not clear if he really recognizes him or just says yes to anybody the police shows
Yeah.
him from the gang.
Mm.
It's not. We don't even know if Dieudonné was there at the time.
Yeah.
It's not clear. As far as I've read in the newspapers, there's never any mention of his name at that point.
Okay.
On the 21st of March 1912, as a reply to the arrest of Dieudonné,
Mm-hmm.
Garnier publishes a letter in the newspaper, in Le Matin, and he ends his long letter by saying, I know I will be vanquished. I'll be the weakest, but I hope I'll make you pay for your victory dearly.
Wow.
That's how he finishes his letter. So he knows he's not going to make it.
Yeah.
He knows eventually they will get caught.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't stop him anyway.
No.
And to authenticate it, he sends his fingerprint with the letter.
That's ballsy.
Oh yeah, at that point he doesn't care.
No.
He knows he's going to get caught.
Well,
at
he's
some point,
he's
so.
an anarchist, isn't he?
So he was just playing with the police because why not?
Thumbing the finger.
So on the 25th of March 1912, Bonnot, Garnier, Calment, and Monnier, Vallée, and Soudy, the latest members who joined the gang,
Newbies.
they get ready to steal another car. They heard of a car delivery that was supposed to go to the southeast coast.
Okay.
Bonnot stands in the middle of the road and flags down the car with his handkerchief. As the car stops, the others appear from their hiding place.
Of course.
Very basic trap.
Ambush, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thinking that the driver is reaching for a gun,
Oh, God, okay.
Garnier and Calment shoot him dead.
Oh, crap.
The car owner, also shot but not dead, reports that Bonnot shouted to the others to stop the craziness.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Bonnot wasn't too keen on the murdering.
No.
The whole time, the one that kills people regularly is Garnier. He seems to be a total psychopath and has no
Mhm.
problem killing anyone. Because Bonnot is the getaway driver, we don't even know if he even killed anyone because he wasn't taking part in the robberies. He was outside in the car waiting most of the time. And given that testimony from the car owner, it sounds like he wasn't happy that they were killing people.
Yeah.
So on a high, the gang decides to go to Chantilly, to another branch of the Société Générale bank. That's their favorite
Okay,
bank.
yeah.
So they have a favorite car and a favorite
My
bank.
favourite bank.
So for an impromptu robbery, they shoot to death 2 employees and they take off with everything they find in the bank, which is 50,000 francs in gold and coins.
That's a big
So
one.
that's good.
More decent, yes.
Yeah, that's a good operation. Bonnot again is the getaway driver, so he's not taking part in the killing.
Mm-hmm.
The local police is alerted, but having only bicycles and horses,
Yeah,
they
once
just watch
again.
them go away.
Yeah. Waving at them out of the window, no
Yeah.
doubt. Mooning them as they
There's-
zoom away.
There was absolutely nothing they could do. After the last attack, police tries a lot harder to end their activities. So on the 30th of March 1912, Soudy is arrested. On the 4th of April 1912, Carouy is arrested. On the 7th of April, Calment is captured. And on the 24th of April 1912, Monnier is arrested.
Wow, so they all fall quite quickly.
So, yes, because they were following the anarchist gangs, they knew who was
yeah.
part of the gang. So it was just a matter of finding them.
Mm-hmm.
And they found most of them, that is Garnier and Bonnot and a couple of minor characters. Unfortunately, these are the diehards, so they're not going to be easy to get. On the 24th of April, the story starts going a lot faster. Things are happening a lot. Bonnot shoots Louis Join, which is a deputy chief of security in France, so that's fairly big cheese.
Yeah.
That happens when the police searches a house in Ivry-sur-Seine, so not far from my parents again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's wounded and he manages to escape. So he goes to a pharmacy to get treatment.
Of course.
He pretends that he fell down a ladder, but the pharmacist doesn't buy it.
No.
So he calls the police. Now the police has a rough idea of where Bonnot is, because that happens very quickly. So they start combing the area. On the 27th of April, 2 days later, they find where he is and they discover that he's hiding at another sympathetic anarchist, Jean Dubois, à Choisy-le-Roi, northwest of Paris. The house is very quickly surrounded because they don't want to give him a chance to get away again. And to be sure that really they can deal with him, they have large number of cops, large number of soldiers, and a whole crowd of people
Wow.
circling the house, looking at what was going on. At that point, they start a siege because he doesn't want to get out. They don't want him to get away, so he's stuck in the house and they're surrounding it. The siege is handled by the police prefect, which was called Rilépine. It's very famous.
Okay.
It's one of the very famous prefects. As the siege progresses, because they don't find a solution, they call on more and more troops.
Okay.
There's even a whole regiment that arrives with machine guns. So at that point, it's war.
At that point, it's turning into Waco.
Oh, yeah, it is Waco, except it's more unbalanced than Waco, because in Waco, they had lots of guns in the
That's
house.
very true, yeah.
He's on his own with a handgun, and they're outside with heavy machine guns and half an army. So,
Well, in that case, it's either Butch or Sundance. Take your pick.
well, it kind of goes that way a little bit because he decides to taunt the police. So he regularly goes out and waves at them and shoots at them.
And none of the...
And they always miss when they
oh,
shoot back.
my God.
They're
They're all
rubbish.
stormtroopers.
Yeah, they're stormtroopers. They're really rubbish. So, and after a while, he just loses interest. It was fun to taunt the police for a while, but then, okay. He sits down and decides to write his last will and testament.
Okay.
Because the police doesn't manage to end the siege, and there's just too many people around and it's getting out of hand, they decide they're just going to dynamite the house.
Okay, that's... Yeah,
That's their solution to end the siege.
that's insane.
It's done by one cop. I think it was called Fournier. I didn't write it down. He used a horse-drawn cart, which he made reverse towards the house until he could hide, put the dynamite, put the fuse, which was very short apparently,
Wow.
and get away. And that's it. They blew up the house. There's photos of the holes in the house and on the website. Bonnot, as that happens, is wounded,
Okay.
but doesn't give up yet. So he finishes his last will.
Okay.
In it, he testifies to the innocence of Dieudonné.
Ah, okay.
He was the first arrested, and he says he wasn't part of anything.
Okay.
He still welcomes the police with his gun, so he still shoots at the police. He's wounded again, and eventually they capture him, send him to hospital, and he dies there not long after.
So he didn't even make it to trial?
No. And because it was such big news, there's loads of photos of his body in the press
Oh, grim.
with lots of holes and blood. And in the photos, you can see that he knew the house was going to be blown up. So he wraps himself into a mattress.
Wow.
And it seems to have worked. He didn't
Okay.
die straight away. So the autopsy is made, and they found 6 wounds. He has 2 bullets that went through his head. They
Oh, my
entered
God.
at the right temple, exited at the left temple, but didn't kill him.
It's insane.
Another one entered his right side and got stuck in his skull,
Yeah.
still not dead.
God.
The 4th one is found in his left cheek, having entered his head from the right, so it crosses the head from another angle. A 5th one, that's the one that killed him, in his chest, and it went through front to back all the way.
All right, okay. Hitting, obviously, vital things on the way.
Yeah. And there was also a 6th wound, which was older, and that was a hole in the hand, which he got when he escaped from Ivry,
Okay.
when they searched the house and managed to escape.
Yeah.
He was wounded, he had a hole in his hand. The last 2 members of the gang are killed in suspiciously similar circumstances
Okay.
on the 14th of May 1912. So we are talking a couple of weeks later. In Nogent-sur-Marne, same story. Several hours of siege, massive police and army deployment, crowd of onlookers, resistance from the gang members, dynamite, and execution.
Okay.
So same thing.
It was a pattern that worked, so
Yeah.
they just used it again and again, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the time, who would know really if it was too much?
Mm-hmm.
So that's Garnier, and I can't remember what the last one was. So that's the end of the gang. That's it.
Okay, that's
They're finished.
They're
Then there's a
toast.
trial.
Okay.
Remember, there's lots of members now.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yes.
So, and they didn't all die. Only 3 of them died when they were arrested. Bonnot, Garnier, and I don't remember who the 3rd one who died. The trial takes place in February 1913. Carrément, knowing that he was going to die, but wanting to take the piss a bit more, denies everything. He does it in a weird way. He does it in a way that makes certain that, in fact, he is guilty. Like, oh, I didn't kill him by shooting him that way and doing that to him.
Yes, yeah.
So So yeah, he is clearly guilty.
It's that whole OJ thing. Here's how I would have done it.
Yes, exactly. So he denies it, but it gives too much detail and way too much information. Of course he knew and he did it. Caroui and Medj, which are two of the other members, are accused of the Thiers murders. They deny, of course, but unfortunately their fingerprints are found on location. So, guilty. Monnier and Soudi are mainly accused of the robbery in Chantilly, the first one, because one of the witnesses recognized them, the same that recognized Dieudonné. Victor Serge, remember, the brain of the operation, that might not have been the brain of the operation, denies everything. And he attempts to prove it by showing that he never benefited financially from the activities of the gang. Okay. Which is not a bad idea, I guess.
Well, yeah, follow the money.
Exactly. Why would you take part of all these
Why would you take all the risks and not reap any of the benefits? Yes.
Exactly. But he's still found guilty.
Okay.
The only doubtful case is Dieudonné, as we said earlier. Bonnot and Garnier both claimed in their wills that he didn't do anything. He also says he has an alibi because he was in Nancy at the time of the crimes. Okay. But because there are several witnesses who recognize him from the first robbery, he's found guilty as well.
Okay.
So Camin, Monnier, Soudi, and Dieudonné are sentenced to death. Okay. Caroui and Medj are sentenced to life of hard labor. And Caroui kills himself in his cell on the 27th of February 1913 because really, hard labor in Guyana or killing yourself, it's faster to kill yourself.
Yep. Die in your own terms.
Yep. After his sentence, even though he maintains his innocence, Camin declares to the court that he's guilty, but that Dieudonné is not guilty. So that's a third member of the gang that says that Dieudonné didn't do anything. Yeah. And Dieudonné's lawyer uses all these to run an appeal against the sentence, and it's commuted to life or hard labor instead of death. God. Did he win?
No.
Victor Serge is sentenced to 5 years in prison. So he's found guilty of being an acquaintance of the gang, but they can't prove he did anything. But because they found guns at his place, then he's sentenced on that. Okay. On that alone.
Purely guilt by association.
And also the fact that they found guns and they use that saying, okay, he had guns, he at least needs to go to jail for having those guns. Yeah. So that's what he does, 5 years. Camin, Monnier, and Soudi are guillotined on the 21st of April 1913 in front of the prison in Paris. And that's the end of everybody. The gang is, of course, very, very famous. So there's books and films and plays and everything you can imagine written about them. Yeah. One thing that the activities of the gang did, beyond being the first ones to use cars to get away, is the way their story was told in the press started to make people understand that the press was going too far in a sensationalism. The way they were telling the story. There's several people, including very famous writers, I think Zola is one of them, who started saying the press should not behave that way. The press should relate information. The press shouldn't tell a sensational...
Just the facts.
It shouldn't be a sensational story and photos of bodies and stuff. That should not happen. No. So it starts happening that way and it changes the press a little bit. And also, the affair marked a change in the history of police because it created a situation where the police had to change their way of working. So first of all, the scientific police was created. And it's also the first large-scale investigation that tries to prove with things other than witnesses what happened. So they use fingerprints, they use everything they can they know at the time to show that, yes, there's witnesses, but also we can prove that it's true. Yeah. And also, it is the first trans-border investigation with Switzerland that had never happened before. Okay. So it changed the way the police works quite a lot at the time.
We're moving towards CSI and Interpol.
It's moving towards modern police and modern evidence because they really wanted to get rid of them, and that's why they dynamited everything. They just didn't care if they killed them, but they wanted to get rid of them. Yeah. But at the same time, they wanted to show that they were justified doing it, so they had to prove what was happening. Exactly. So that's it. That's Bande Bonnot. They're finished in 1913.
Oh, and I think the moral of the story this week is definitely anarchy does not pay.